Welcome everyone to our Way of Nonviolence annual Michael True Lecture. My name is Claire Schaefer-Duffy and I'm Program Director at the Center for Nonviolence Solutions, a small nonprofit with the mission to build a culture of peace in Worcester and beyond. Educating people in the ways of peacemaking is our part in that ambitious endeavor. For us at the center, this includes teaching people peace-building skills, as well as upholding examples of nonviolent movements, past and present. This was a passion of center co-founder Mike True. He wanted to let people know the good news of nonviolence, how it was evolving in its application, how we were becoming more conscious of it as a people. A peace scholar and activist, Mike was continually writing about or participating in efforts to stop human beings from killing one another. It really was that fundamental, just to stop us from killing each other, what needs to be done. During the 1980s, he supported and was actively involved in the local movement for nuclear disarmament. In fact, Mike was arrested with his daughter, Mary Laurel True, my husband, Scott, and others protesting outside the GTE facility in Westborough, Massachusetts. The company had a military contract to design the guidance system for the MX, a ground-launched nuclear missile with more than 300 times the destructive power of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Today, nuclear weapons are not in popular consciousness, even though these weapons, like the climate crisis, represent an existential threat. Yet the movement to prohibit their production and use is very much alive, as tonight's documentary will show. The beginning of the end of nuclear weapons tells a story that I think after you see it will give you hope. Following the film, we will have a discussion with Dr. Ira Helfand, a key member of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, the global movement that led to the realization of the UN Nuclear Ban Treaty. Dr. Helfand is a member of the International Steering Group for ICAN, which received the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize. The former president of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, he's a leading voice on the humanitarian impact and medical consequences of nuclear weapons. Educated at Harvard College and the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, he recently retired from his practice as an internist and urgent care physician in Springfield, Massachusetts. So please, everybody, stay with us after the screening. He'll get us up to date on where this movement to implement the treaty stands and also what we can do locally on this effort. All of you that took a lot of heart from that documentary. It just tells some extraordinary story of what we've done to hurt each other as human beings, but also what human beings are doing to stop that destruction. So for this part of the evening, we'd like to hear from Dr. Ira Helfand, who, as many of you saw, was in the film and who is affiliated, in fact, led the International Physicians for Social Responsibility, if I got that right, I hope. What perhaps many of you caught that it was doctors speaking about the medical consequences of these weapons that really ignited a treaty that calls for their total prohibition. So Dr. Helfand, if you could get us up to date, because this movie was made in 2020 and a lot has happened with the ban treaty. So tell us the status, because that's too is very exciting.
Sorry. Sure. So at the time that the film was made, the treaty had not yet entered into force. In order to do that, it needed to have 50 countries ratify the treaty. And that milestone was passed in October of last year, when the 50th country ratified the treaty. We're now up to 56 countries that have ratified it. And as a result of that, it entered into force 90 days later on January 22nd of this year. And it's now in force. legally binding treaty on the countries that have signed and ratified it. And that is the major development over the last bit of time. Since the treaty has entered into force, there will be the first meeting of states parties to the treaty in March of this year. The treaty calls for all the countries that have joined it to meet on an annual basis to review what progress has been made to universalize the treaty, to get the countries which haven't signed and ratified yet to join in this process. And that meeting will take place in Vienna, March 22nd to March 24th of next year, COVID permitting. There is a strong desire that this meeting take place in person, that it not be a Zoom meeting, because we want this first meeting to have a lot of energy so that it spurs further efforts to universalize the treaty. And those are the major developments with regards to the treaty itself. Now, with regards to the situation around nuclear weapons, the story is not so good. You know, the film referred to the fact that there was a period of time when the nuclear danger seemed to have passed and when people were not paying much attention. It never actually went away, of course, but it is also true that for a period of time, things weren't as bad as they were during the Cold War. But over the last several years, we've moved very dramatically and dangerously in the opposite direction, to the point where experts are telling us now that the danger of nuclear war is greater than it's ever been. Former Secretary of Defense William Perry has been saying that for several years now. The expert panel at the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists also has said that we are closer to nuclear war than we've ever been, setting their iconic doomsday clock to just 100 seconds to midnight. That was like last year and at the beginning of this year. But even in just the last few months, the tension between the United States and China, largely over Taiwan, has escalated dramatically. The situation in Korea has seriously deteriorated, with South Korea now talking about acquiring its own nuclear arsenal to counter the North Korean nuclear weapons. And here in the United States, the Nuclear Posture Review, the study that's undertaken by each new administration to decide what its nuclear posture should be, has essentially been hijacked by people who do not favor the elimination of nuclear weapons. We had hopes that President Biden, who has made some very positive statements about nuclear weapons in the past, would create a panel that would produce a nuclear posture review that took real steps towards the elimination of these weapons. But instead, the person who was supposed to lead the process, Undersecretary of Defense Leonor Todoro, was summarily dismissed in September. And all the indications at the moment are that the process is going to lead to a document sometime in January or February, which essentially reaffirms current US nuclear policy. And that, I think, will be a terrible, terrible disaster if it happens, because we need to change that policy, and we need to do it very urgently. You know, time is not on our side in this situation. As the film suggested several times, in discussing the near misses that we've had, we are here today only because we have been extraordinarily lucky. It is not the wisdom of our leaders or the soundness of our military doctrine or the infallibility of our technology that has seen us through the nuclear weapons era so far. It is, as former Defense Secretary Robert McNamara said, we are here because we lucked out. It is luck that has prevented nuclear war. And especially as the tensions between nations increase, that luck is not going to last indefinitely. If we're going to avoid nuclear war, we have to get rid of these weapons. And so that requires a very, very fundamental change in US nuclear policy.
Thank you. I just want to add one point on the positive, that the treaty went into effect in January of 2021 this year. And some of you were with us when we were celebrating at Lincoln Square, ringing the bells. In June of this year, our state representative, Mary Keefe, signed the legislators' pledge to support the treaty. And that was done with the invitation of the center. We invited her to do it, and she very readily said that she would. And we do have a federal representative, Jim McGovern, who was among the first to publicly support this treaty that calls for the prohibition of nuclear weapons.
And I think there's tremendous room for continued activity along those lines, Claire. You know, here in the United States, when the treaty was adopted in 2017, we started the National Back from the Brink campaign as a way of rallying support for the treaty here in the United States. And this campaign, which is modeled on the Freeze campaign of the 1980s, sort of sets out, calls on the United States to embrace the treaty, to stop its opposition to it, and to take a number of very specific steps to try to advance the treaty. And it specifically calls on the United States to begin now the negotiations with the other 8 nuclear-armed states for a verifiable, enforceable, time-bound agreement to dismantle their nuclear weapons. Those details were not included in the TPNW by design. We knew that they would need to be negotiated after the treaty was adopted by the nuclear-armed states themselves. And so it's time for those negotiations to begin. And the United States can and should play a leadership role in bringing about those negotiations. Now, so far, this campaign has been endorsed by over 380, I believe it is, civil society organizations across the country, some of them local, some of them national organizations. It's been endorsed by 53 cities and towns. And the ICANN Cities Appeal actually arose out of our campaign here in the United States after the city of Los Angeles passed its Back from the Brink resolution. That was the inspiration for the Cities Appeal. And the vast majority of the cities in the United States which have signed the Cities Appeal have done so through the Back from the Brink campaign. 53 cities and towns, including about 16 here in Massachusetts, and 6 state legislative bodies. There are some real opportunities for us here in Massachusetts. The Worcester City Council has not passed a Back from the Brink resolution. On the Boston City Council, 6 of the 13 members have individually signed a letter endorsing the Back from the Brink campaign. And we're reaching out to the other 7, but we haven't gotten a resolution through the Boston City Council yet. And in the state legislature, there's a resolution that has been introduced congratulating the countries which have signed the TPNW, urging the United States to embrace the treaty, and urging the United States to begin these negotiations. That bill is currently sitting in the state legislature's Committee on Public Safety and Homeland Security. And the usual fate of bills of this type is that they get referred to committee and then they never come out again. And so the real key to is to get a vote on the Senate floor. We believe if this is reported out to the state Senate, it will pass. There are a couple of members of that committee who represent constituencies in the Worcester area. And it would be a particularly useful thing to, in addition to trying perhaps to get a city council resolution in Worcester, to try to get those members of the state legislature who are on this committee to support reporting the bill out, which needs to happen by February 2nd of next year, or the bill dies in committee. And it's State Senator Moore, who represents a significant portion of the city, I believe. State Senator Fatman, who is not in the city, but in the southern part of Worcester County. And Representative is, I believe it's Zlotnick, who represents part of the city in the House. These 3 people are all on this committee. And if there are people in the group tonight who are represented by any of these legislators, I would love to be in contact with you to work out how we could reach out to them to try to get them to support this bill. We have been meeting with many of the people on the committee and have found, when we're able to get it before their attention, people are supportive. The problem, as again was suggested in the film, is that people just don't pay attention to this issue anymore. They pretend as though it's all gone away. But once you can get them to focus on it for a few minutes, and they realize how critically important it is to address this issue, it's not that difficult to convince them to take action. Sorry.
So, Dr. Helfand, if you could put in the chat box the bills, the specific title of the bill, and the link to the Back from the Brink campaign. I may ask you to explain that, but I just want to take us back for a minute. This will be my last question because I'm sure there are questions from the audience that want to direct to you. What I got from watching this documentary is an unexpected hope, because I think when I talk to people, I'm hearing a lot of exhaustion, and there's so many crises that are happening. Where does one focus? Where does one feel that you can make a difference? We are less than 2 weeks from the big COP conference in Glasgow, where um, heads of state will be conversing about the climate threat. I mean, the threat of the changing climate. And listening to the ICANN organizer, I can't remember her name, one of the key women, talk about, well, we decided that the nuclear powers were going to be, we were going to change the power dynamic. We were not going to wait for them. We were going to create this treaty ourselves. So how did a bunch of doctors or international physicians get that push to, make that's a big push to get people to think that way, that we're just going to do it ourselves, and then and educate them. So I don't know if that question is too broad, but can you just walk us through a little bit of your how-tos on this campaign?
I think that's a great question, Claire. Thank you. I think the really key factor, and I think this was also alluded to at the beginning of the film, was redefining the terms of the debate. If this is viewed as sort of a question of nuclear doctrine, military strategy, it becomes the realm of the experts, and they immediately start talking in this very abstract way as though they're playing chess. If you talk about the humanitarian impact of these weapons, what happens if these bombs are actually dropped? The whole dynamic of the conversation changes. And that was, I think, the great success of this campaign. It was launched by the physicians group, and this was our position. This is not a military problem. This is the greatest public health problem in the world today. And we need to approach it through that lens. What are we going to do if these weapons are used? And the answer from the Red Cross and from others in the medical community is nothing useful is going to be done. We don't have a response to this. And given that, if you cannot treat an illness, if you cannot respond to a medical condition, then you absolutely must prevent it from happening in the first place. And we presented data. I had the honor of speaking at both the Oslo and Nairi conferences, making a presentation about the medical consequences of nuclear war, and discussing not just the immediate effects, what would happen in a city that was hit by a nuclear explosion, but the global climate impact that this would have. And I think that was what really, in many ways, turned the tide. The treaty has drawn most of its support from countries in the global south, Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia, all of which are nuclear weapons-free zones. In all of these areas, the countries thought they had dealt with the nuclear problem. They had excluded nuclear weapons from their area. What we were able to show them was that that was a noble and good thing to do, but it didn't protect their people, because a nuclear war any place on the planet would put of a certain size, and it's a quite small size, less than 0.3% of the world's nuclear arsenals, would put enough soot into the upper atmosphere to trigger a worldwide global famine. It changes the climate, it cools the planet, it cuts down on the rainfall, and crops fail. And that famine, we predicted, could affect, possibly kill, up to 2 billion people. And this was, I think, transformative argument when the countries in Latin America and Africa and Southeast Asia realized that their people were still at risk from nuclear weapons, even though they had made nuclear weapons-free zones. That's what really made them, I think, decide that they needed to get rid of these weapons altogether. They needed to invest energy in this effort, despite all the other huge problems they face. Now, you referred, Claire, to the very difficult situation that we are all dealing with now. We are exhausted. We've been through an incredibly draining pandemic. We went through a totally frightening political year here in the United States. We are dealing with the climate crisis. We're dealing with the economic fallout from the pandemic. There's a lot on everyone's plate. But we cannot afford to ignore the biggest threat of all. And the fact that we can win on this that we can get rid of these nuclear weapons, I think should give us hope and should energize us to take on this challenge. And perhaps the best piece of all this is, if we can mobilize people, getting rid of nuclear weapons is actually going to be pretty simple. I mean, we've dismantled 50,000 of them. Dismantling the remaining 13,000 can be done in maybe 5 or 6 years. It doesn't require the whole world to start living differently as the climate crisis does. It's a very small problem in many ways. But to solve it will require a level of cooperation among governments and peoples around the world that can be a real model for dealing with the other problems we face. A world that has eliminated nuclear weapons will be much better prepared to eliminate the climate crisis as well. So I think that's really the key to it. Recognizing that this is not something which should be left to military experts. This is a public health problem which affects all of us, and we all have the right and the power to speak up on this question.
Well said. I want to open up and give other people a chance or opportunity to ask questions about the Back from the Brink campaign, the international the treaty itself, what's its current status. We did hear a little bit about that. We're getting a wonderful update from Rosalie Riegel, who's telling us that the Chicago Area Peace Action and Union of Concerned Scientists have proposed a Back from the Brink resolution to their city council, and that it has several sponsors. So we're getting in the chat some local updates. Thanks, Rosalie. Thank you so much. Do you want to talk about how you made that happen, or if you have a question?
Well, I'll be brief because there isn't much to say. We got a wonderful, very progressive council person to present it, I think, in September, working with Kathy, Chicago Area Peace Action, and people that had worked with me. And Chicago's big and embroiled in all sorts of other stuff. And we heard last week that they'll add budgets in January. So what we're doing now is to try to work to get individual council people. And I mean, you know, Chicago politics are horrible, but get individuals on by contacting people who vote in Chicago. So if there's anybody online that votes in Chicago, please send me your email and I'll get you working, because so many of us are from the North Shore and not living in Chicago, so we're kind of powerless. So anyway, but we've got a couple people. There's a resolution in the Illinois House, but it's the same thing. They're much more concerned with other things. We need to get people scared, and I don't know how to do it. Thank you.
Are there other questions from people? I can't see all the screens, so just unmute yourself if you have a question. I have one. Could you just explain what you mean by Back from the Brink? I don't think most people know what that is about.
Sure. The Back from the Brink campaign was started in 2017 here in Massachusetts. And as I mentioned, it was modeled on the Freeze campaign. The idea was to propose a platform of what US nuclear policy should be as opposed to what it currently is. And it was inspired in that regard very much by the Freeze campaign in the 1980s, which said the current policy of the United States and Soviet Union then was to build about 3,000 new nuclear warheads per year. And the Freeze campaign said this should stop. We should freeze the arms race and then move back from there. And so the Back from the Brink campaign said that we should embrace the treaty and the prohibition of nuclear weapons and begin the negotiations that among the nuclear armed states to work out the details of how they would get rid of their nuclear arsenals. And the hope is that if we can get enough cities and towns and NGOs to endorse this platform, we will essentially be creating a national consensus that this is what nuclear policy should be. That's how the freeze worked. It grew very rapidly, and after a few years, there was just a national consensus. This is crazy to keep the arms race going. We need to stop this. And that was an important backdrop for the decision that the Reagan administration made to respond when Gorbachev offered his overtures to end the arms race. So we look for organizations. I don't know if your group has actually endorsed Back from the Brink. If you haven't, it'd be lovely if you did. But in particular, it would be terrific to get the Worcester City Council on board. The Springfield City Council voted unanimously to support this when we brought it before the Springfield City Council. The Northampton City Council voted unanimously. The East Hampton City Council voted unanimously. If you can get it on the agenda, it usually passes quite easily. And the trick is to, as Rosalie was just reporting from Chicago, identifying a member of the council who is sympathetic and willing to introduce the resolution. And I will give the same invitation that Rosalie did. If there are people in the Worcester area who would like to work on this, please get in touch with me. I would love to work with you to try to get this done. I put my email in the chat a little while ago, and I'll put it in again.
That's great. And we will save the chat. So if folks don't get a chance to jot it down tonight, we'll have it for you. You can contact the center. So Springfield passed. That's wonderful. Well, Worcester, we have to up our game. We have to be.
Yeah, you can't be outshone by Springfield.
Yeah, we'd be nonviolently competitive here. Good job, Mike Moran, over there. Are there other questions? I have one that's always asked. You don't seem wiped out. What helps you keep going? You seem to be pretty. What keeps you in this? This is like so many works for eliminating violence. It's always a long haul, but that can change quickly. But what's kept you going and kept you at it?
Well, as so many people said towards the end of the film, I think it's hope in a sense that this is possible. I think to get action on this, we need two things. We need fear. And we're not supposed to use fear. Fear is supposed to be a bad thing, but it's not. Fear is the appropriate human response to a real danger. And this is a very real danger. And if we're going to get people to pay attention to it in a setting where there are so many other issues on their plate, people have to be appropriately afraid of the danger of nuclear war. On the other hand, people also have to see that there's a way out of this danger, that there's hope for the future. And a clip that was included in the film, which a line that I use all the time, we have to understand this is in our power. Nuclear weapons are not a force of nature. It's not like a movie where an asteroid is coming to the planet and there's nothing we can do about it. These weapons are about the size of the chair that I'm sitting in for the most part. They're little tiny machines that we have built with our own hands, and we've taken apart thousands of them. We know exactly how to do it. This is something which we can do, and we can do it quickly. This is not a vision for some, distant time in the future that we're going to have a world free of nuclear weapons. We can summon the political will now. We could have this done by the end of the decade. And I think that's what keeps me going, is both the fear of what's going to happen if we don't succeed in this effort, and the knowledge that we absolutely can succeed. And perhaps, since we need evidence to support assumptions like that, it's the example of the 1980s. We were headed towards nuclear war in 1981 when Ronald Reagan was elected. He ran on a platform that we should prepare to be able to fight and win a nuclear war in Europe. And he actually believed that. And he built the weapons, he built the Pershing missiles to be able to do just that. And 4 years later, after he took office, he sat down with Gorbachev and said, nuclear war can never be won and must never be fought. It was such a profound 180-degree change in US nuclear policy that when he first said it, none of us believed that he really meant it, but he did. And so we've done this once before. We've gone from a situation where we were racing towards nuclear war to the end of the Cold War. So we know we can do it. We've done it once before. We're just challenging ourselves to do again what we've already done. That's where I get my energy from.
Yes, I would just like to add that I was 21 and in London when they had the big 200,000 march against the Euro missiles. And that was my introduction to the anti-nuclear movement. And it's really been a joy to walk with that tribe, which is global, because there's just been a lot of stick-to-itiveness among them. And I got to meet some wonderful, wonderful, wonderful people. But it was in the autumn of 1981 that Europe was, Caspar Weinberger was talking about having a war, a contained nuclear war in Europe. That would be the testing ground, and people were terrified, and it did mobilize a lot of public outcry. So any other people who have questions? We're almost at 8:30. It's wonderful that we've had you with us and your work. Yes, and anyone else? Let me give a chance to. Anybody.
Claire, I was just wondering, thank you so much, Ira and Claire, for organizing this. I thought the movie could be a vehicle. I hadn't seen it before. So where do we get it to show to groups or to, is that in the chat?
Yeah, great question. You can see it. It's available on YouTube, and
Okay.
it's a little challenging to do it, through a Zoom thing. So bravo to Rochelle to figuring it out. But
Okay.
yeah, we can get you that link, Suzanne. And
Okay.
I had the same response. I thought this was a very, very, very good
Excellent.
educational tool because it really covered a lot in 55 minutes.
Yes, it was really excellent. And thank you for crafting it so beautifully, Ira. And all of this was incredible information and very energizing. And yet I know that the response in parishes within the Catholic Church would be negligible, if at all. So in terms of how we work within a church structure, we're going to have to do something outside of the church and most pulpits, because it's just not going to happen. But people of faith will respond. And, I think maybe the interfaith movement and talking about environmental racism and the environmental racism of nukes and engaging Native people and African-American activists to see the dimensions of white supremacy and a white privilege, white everything in the horrors of the perpetration of this racist bomb on the Japanese. So I would like to, at least I'm thinking this, brewing this in my mind, that would be a way of integrating our Native sisters and brothers and, our movement activists and Black Lives Matter is just talking about environmental racism and of course the racism of the bomb.
Yes, I think those are excellent points. And it reminds me something that is so basic and yet so overlooked is the human body. What violence does to the human body, whether it's the violence of racism or a nuclear bomb or a bullet or a beating or exploitation, contamination from pollutants. And I really am grateful to the doctors for bringing that truth right before us, to see we all are the same species. So we all need health. We need human health. And I think this is a great bond between us. So it was a really to take that humanitarian lens is crucial. And it's crucial in the climate struggle as well, that we no longer think about energy just through, resource and dollars and efficiency, but its consequence on the human body and what it means for the bodies of human beings. Great. Okay. Any more final thoughts? It's just been great to have you. Oh, we've got Mike. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah,
Mike.
Claire, thank you. And I know it's after 8:30, but I do want to just piggyback on a comment that Suzanne made. In addition to what she's said, we in our Western Massachusetts Pax Christi local group, we have actually written a statement supporting the treaty, and we've shared it with Bishop Byrne, who is relatively new as the bishop of the Springfield Diocese. He has reviewed it. He's been supportive, and we're sort of in dialogue with him right now. He is still, as he put it to us a few months ago, still crafting his peace and justice program for the diocese. And so we certainly haven't given up on working within the church, but I agree with Suzanne that we need to be working in multiple channels within the Catholic community and partnering with the broader community. Certainly, Ira has been big in partnering with organizations at many levels. Right now, he and I are both part of the campaign nonviolence group that's organized in Greater Springfield. So, I think there are many hopeful signs that we can build on. You heard from Ira about the Springfield City Council. There are just a lot of things that can happen with just a few people getting actively involved and then bringing in more. So let's keep doing it. And thank you, Ira and Claire, for putting this program together. Very inspiring.
Yeah.
I'd like to echo what Mike said and just remind people that working with your faith groups and working interfaith is the way to get things done on a local level. And then to just try to get more people to contact their representatives and their state senators and anybody with any sort of title and get them to sign that endorsement thing, because that gives you a basis to work for the political change. I think there's two things to do. You have to change hearts and minds, get them excited about it, get them worried about it, and then you have to get the government to act. So you can do both at once by doing it one by one.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I felt the spirit of Mike True with us tonight, and so many others who've gone before us. I'm thinking specifically of a wonderful, many of you don't know her, but Sister Ardith Platy, who died in the past year, just really gave her heart and soul to working for a world free of nuclear weapons, and was present during the UN process as they were in the final crafting of the treaty, she and Sister Carol, and they were sitting there right there with the doctors and the other civil society groups, and it was a really, I got to be with them a few days before they actually produced the treaty, and the energy at the UN was impressive. It was great. So we thank you, ICANN. We thank you, Dr. Helfand, for your example and your work, and lots of cross-fertilization here. So thank you.
Thank you, Claire, for inviting me, and thank you all for joining us tonight. And again, I at the moment, I'm particularly focused on trying to get this resolution here in Massachusetts as a key next step. So if any of you are able to help work on that, please do get in touch by email. Thanks.